Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of Blink Twice, the directorial debut of Zoe Kravitz, daughter to Lenny Kravitz. She's engaged to the film star Channing Tatum. I just love it when somebody who has been in front of the camera for a very long time. My favorite role of hers has been Catwoman in The Batman with Robert Pattinson. Decides get behind the camera. I think the benefit of that is an actor who has worked with different directors. They know what they like, they know what they don't like, and therefore they know how to get the performances out of the actors that they want because they've been there before. We are in an age now where I think we need new, fresh directors with new ideas, making unique stories that aren't a part of a franchise. Though I do feel this movie is heavily inspired by some recent horror movies. It doesn't have any real source material. It is standing on its own. So what is this movie about? Before I get into it, I will say this is the only movie I can think of in recent history that had a trigger warning at the beginning. And I think it has to do with It Ends With Us coming out a couple of weeks ago, that movie not having a trigger warning, even though it deals with domestic abuse. Maybe some people went to go see that not knowing that. Maybe they didn't read the book. So I think they made it a point to give this movie a trigger warning because it does have some sexual violence in here. So I feel like this movie isn't for everybody. And even for me, who I've never experienced anything like that, I sometimes like to know when something is going to be that heavy, because sometimes when it comes out of nowhere and you're not prepared for it, especially if you are somebody who has dealt with that, it can really hit you in a way that you don't want to go into a theater and experience with a bunch of strangers. So I'm glad they put this trigger warning at the beginning. And here's what the trigger warning said. Blink Twice is a psychological thriller about the abuse of power. While this is a fictionalized movie, it contains mature themes and depictions of violence, including sexual violence. This may be upsetting and triggering to some viewers. So what this movie is about, you have this tech billionaire named Slater King, played by Channing Tatum. And at the beginning of the movie, he has been in some kind of trouble. It doesn't really say flat out what happened, but you kind of start to infer some things because it starts with him giving an interview where he is apologizing. He is saying he's sorry. He is saying he's changing. And he says in efforts to kind of make amends and get himself better, he's going to therapy. And on top of that, he has bought this island that he just goes to, has no technology, and just goes to therapy. It's supposed to be him rebuilding and working on himself. But he just does this interview where he's like, I'm all good now. I'm getting better. I am sorry to everybody. So you have to assume that he is apologizing for something. And of course, given the trigger warning here, given the fact that this movie is about the abuse of power, you just kind of start to infer things, especially once they get to the island. So how do we get on this island? Well, you have a character named Frida, who has really been down on her luck. She's been working as a cocktail waitress, and she finds a way to meet Slater King by faking some credentials, gets into a fancy party, and before you know it, she is talking with him, she is hanging out with him, and it is blowing her mind because she was just, at the beginning of the movie, she was watching this interview that he was doing, apologizing, and now she is there with him, and he appears to have some interest in her. And because she has been so down on her luck, she has a best friend who they were just talking at the beginning of the movie that I desperately need a vacation. She is struggling making rent. They are living in a rundown apartment, and then meet one of the most famous billionaires who suddenly invites her to this island with zero time to get anything ready. Just, hey, you want to come with us? And you ask yourself as the viewer, if this was me, if I was in a really tough point in my life, nothing was going my way, nobody was paying attention to me, I can't get invited to parties, I can't even make rent. Suddenly, this rich, famous, powerful, good-looking person is telling you, you want to get on my jet? Would you go do this? And I feel like this is a commentary on a lot of things. The immediate thing that came to mind was Epstein Island, going to an island where anything happens and you get there and they immediately take away your cell phones. You know something is going to go down. But would you be able to look the other way on all of those red flags just because you need a vacation? You just want to feel special. You go there with no belongings. You don't have your cell phone, but suddenly they have clothes for you to wear. They have all this nice food, and it seems like paradise. How many red flags would you ignore? There is something unsettling here, but obviously it's a psychological thriller. You have to suspend belief, and it wouldn't be a movie if they would ignore all those red flags. So she goes along with it. Channing Tatum is on this island with a bunch of his other tech friends. One of them is an actor who had their TV show canceled, played by Haley Joel Osment. This movie has a really unique cast that somehow works together. It is a very diverse group. You also have Christian Slater, who I really wasn't expecting to really enjoy in this movie. Gina Davis, the one and only Gina Davis, talking about a league of their own herself, has a pretty substantial role in this movie. Adria Arjona, who I know primarily now from Hitman with Glenn Powell. It took me a second to realize that that was her. She showed me an entirely different side from her that I already got a glimpse of after watching her in Hitman. But again, keeping this all spoiler free, I won't get into too many of the plot points. All of this happens that I'm talking about within the first 30 minutes. They get to the island, and slowly things start appearing a little bit weird, and slowly it starts turning into a nightmare where our main character is wondering, are these things actually happening? Is it all in my head? Because there are a lot of just sinister undertones, a lot of symbolism, and a lot of things that you as the viewer start to put together. This movie was very reminiscent to me of Get Out, The Menu, which was another great psychological thriller, Nine Perfect Strangers, the series on Hulu. It's almost all those things put together where you have a group of people living on an island, a very resort style, group bonding, lots of drugs, lots of partying, all while these really weird things are happening that everybody is just choosing not to pay attention to. And I think that was the only hard thing for me to buy into. The whole pay no attention to that trope where something truly disturbing happens, and then you have the main person, which in this case was Channing Tatum, just like, pay no attention to that. Don't look behind the curtain. I don't really like that trope because it kind of just pushes away any kind of credibility that the movie starts to build, because their only way of dealing with it is telling you as the viewer and also the main characters, hey, pay no attention to that, when I would be asking every single question. So really, the only thing I felt this movie didn't do was build that tension in the first and second act to create that suspense, to really have me on the edge of my seat, which I feel other movies that this movie was inspired by, like Get Out, do so well. They give you those little pops that they feel terrifying in the moment that they are happening, and they add to this level of horror and suspense that keeps you really engaged throughout the entire movie. And I wouldn't even call it a slow burn. It just almost felt a little bit like everybody just hanging out and you kind of wondering, is this even going anywhere? And with the themes of this movie and in the genre that it is going to be one of those movies that you are either going to love or hate. If you have loved or hated the movies I've mentioned, like Get Out, The Menu, or even Us from Jordan Peele, that is going to really determine whether or not you enjoy this movie. But I will say, once this movie started to pick up and it got to some more action, that's where it really started to own itself. That's where it really separated itself from all those movies I've been mentioning and truly became its own movie. So I feel like it was trying to have more of that Twilight Zone vibe in the beginning and then almost turned into an action or revenge in the style of Quentin Tarantino. And that is where this movie really shined. And speaking of Quentin Tarantino, there was a little Pulp Fiction Easter egg that I caught at the beginning of the movie. If you remember Samuel L. Jackson's wallet in Pulp Fiction, the bad MFer wallet that he has, there was a button on the main character's backpack that had that same font, that same logo, and that same saying. So I felt like that was a little bit of a nod to that movie, maybe a little bit of a nod to Quentin Tarantino. The other Easter egg I noticed was that Zoë Kravitz put her dad in the movie at the beginning, where the main character is swiping through TikTok or I think maybe Instagram. You see the video of Lenny Kravitz working out in full leather pants, but just crushing it. I love Lenny Kravitz, and I forget how many good songs he has. I forget that he has such a talented daughter. So I really like that she found a way to put him in the movie without having a cheap cameo. I also thought it was interesting that she didn't put herself in this movie, which most directors do, especially in their debut. Unless she was hidden somewhere in there, I like the fact that she didn't feel the need to put herself in her own movie. The main character, Frida, played by Naomi Ackie, I thought was phenomenal. I really enjoyed the way she played the character and how overall there was this really good arc on her story. And although the movie took a little while to get going, it's only an hour and 36 minutes and has a really gratifying end. And even though there were some loose ends that I feel they didn't quite tie up, I still really enjoyed it. For Blink Twice, I give it 4 out of 5 Polaroids.